As you've just taken the first few steps into your sewing journey, my wish for you is that you've felt a small spark of joy and accomplishment as you've made your first stitches. Sewing is such a purposeful activity. With just 3 simple objects, the possibilities are endless. From here on out is where you begin to grow into your own creative style. As you've been practicing the running stitch, I know you're improving a lot as your hands and fingers are getting used to handling the fabric and using your needle and thread. Ready to learn another stitch that's both strong and decorative called the backstitch. You've practiced the running stitch, which moves forward in a dashed line, but the backstitch actually steps backward to create a continuous unbroken line. It's one of the strongest hand stitches and is also used for seams that need to hold up well, which we'll be using in a later lesson. But today we'll be using it for decoration. We'll practice the backstitch on a small piece of felt just like we did the last time for the running stitch. Practicing a few rows will give you a feel for this new stitch before moving on to the bookmark that we'll be making together. So grab a small piece of felt, your chenille needle, and some floss that shows up well against the felt that you've chosen. To start working on our backstitch, I want you to grab a piece of felt and we're going to draw a straight line and a curvy line. Then you'll choose some floss that contrasts well against the felt that you've chosen so that you can see your stitches well. Go ahead and thread your needle, tie a knot, and let's get going. So for a backstitch, what we're going to do is we're going to start about 1/4 inch into our line. So if you'll remember when we do a running stitch, we start at the very end. A backstitch, we come down about 1/4 inch. Pull your floss through until your needle stops on the back. And this time we're going to go backwards to the end of the line. And there, you've made your first stitch. Now the trick to a backstitch is you're always going to come up on your line 1/4 inch ahead of the stitch you've just made. And then you're going backwards, and these 2 stitches are going to share this little hole. So you're going back down into that same hole. And then we're going to do it again, 1/4 inch beyond your previous stitch, and then back down into that shared hole. And then I just want you to continue all the way down this line, practicing your back stitch. And when we get to the end, we'll tie off. And as you can see, I'm reaching the end of my floss, but I have a little bit more than a needle's length of floss, so I'm still good. So I'm on the back, and we're going to tie off the exact same way we did for the running stitch. Going 2 times under that stitch. And then I'm going to thread my needle through 1 more stitch to secure that little tail down. All right, now that you've stitched a straight line of backstitch, let's go ahead and try our curvy line. You're going to do it the exact same way, starting 1/4 inch into the line that you've drawn, pulling your thread through until your knot stops, and then working backwards. Then coming up 1/4 inch in front of that stitch and sharing that same hole. So there's really no trick about doing a curvy line other than you're just following the line, and when you're done, your line is curvy. So as you're stitching, go ahead and be thinking of those 4 S's as you're sewing along, and work your way down to the end of the row. And then we'll tie off when we get there. All right, once you reach the end of your line, you're going to make your last stitch go toward the back. And then we'll just go ahead and turn it over and tie off. And there you go. Practice as much as you need to until you're happy with your stitches. Even though we're shooting for straight, small, same-sized, and evenly spaced, everyone has their own unique stitching style, and yours will change a little bit the more you practice. But once you find your rhythm, you're good to go. As we make a felt bookmark together, we'll be using the running stitch again and the back stitch. We'll be learning another new stitch too, called the cross stitch, and a technique called appliqué. Let's take a look at the bookmark we'll be making. We'll be using the running stitch here around the leaves and around the acorns, and then we'll add the back stitch here to make the veins of the leaves and the twigs for the acorns, and then finally we'll be coming back and doing some cross stitches across the acorn caps. The first thing we'll do before we start any project is to print and cut out the pattern. It's important to follow the pattern as directed so that the piece turns out as expected. The first thing you're going to do after you print out your pattern for each project is you're going to measure the test square in the corner. It needs to measure 1 inch, and after you measure and your shirt measures 1 inch, that will tell you that the pattern is the correct size and you can proceed. So before you cut it out, you're going to take note of all the information on the pattern pieces. This piece says it's the bookmark piece and I'll need to cut 2. I've got an oak leaf here that says I also need to cut 2 acorns and 2 acorn caps. So I'm good on the information and I'm ready to cut it out. So I'm going to cut around the solid line using my paper scissors, not my fabric scissors. And then I did want to point out here too, I'm going to cut out the reference template, which is basically just the layout that we're going to use as we're laying all the pattern pieces on our bookmark once it's cut out. So this is just for reference, but I'm going to cut it out as well. Now that all the pattern pieces are cut out, we'll pin them to the felt and cut out your design. Before you start each project, check the course guide for a complete list of supplies, which will be listed under each specific lesson and project number. There you'll find measurements for the materials needed, so refer to Lesson 2, Project 1, and gather together all the felt colors you chose for this project and the coordinating floss, and let's get started. All right, let's go ahead and pull in our felt pieces that we chose for this project. You can see that I cut them down to more manageable sizes to cut. Let's go ahead and start with our bookmark piece. So it says right on the piece that I need to cut out 2. So we're just going to cut them out one at a time. And I'll start by pinning the piece to the felt. And I'm going to go right through the paper into the felt and out the other side. And I think if I put 4 pins, that should hold it well enough for me to cut the piece out. Then we'll put 1 more pin down here. Now taking my fabric scissors, I'll just cut around this piece. All right, once I get 1 cut out, I'm going to go ahead and unpin my pattern piece, set that piece off to the side, and we're going to pin 1 more on and cut out my second bookmark piece. Doing it the exact same way as you did before. All right, I've got both my bookmark pieces cut out and I'll set those to the side. To cut out my acorn, because it's a little bit of a smaller piece, I like to just hold it in place as I cut it out. So I'm going to cut myself a piece of the fabric while I'm holding my acorn under my thumb. And then I'm just going to use my embroidery scissors to cut around this piece because they're a little bit smaller and I think it's easier to maneuver around a smaller piece than using my bigger fabric scissors. Once the pieces are all cut out, unpin the paper pattern pieces and store them in an envelope. Each project includes what I call a reference template. This picture will help you know where to place each fabric piece on your design before you pin it and stitch it down. All right, let's go ahead and lay out our bookmark design. We're only going to be using one of the bookmark pieces right now because the other one is for the back, so you can set that one aside. So pull out your reference template and lay it right next to your bookmark, and that way we'll know where all the pieces go. So we'll start with this leaf here on top, and we're going to place it right about where we think the other one is on the reference template. And then we'll lay out our acorns. And this does not have to be exact. This is just to be a guide for you to use. If you have a different way you'd like to place your leaves and acorns, that's completely fine. One thing you do need to take note of when you're laying out your design is we want to make sure you leave at least 1/4 of an inch space all the way around the bookmark so that when we come back and sew the backing onto our bookmark, there's plenty of room to do our stitching here along the edge. Okay, now that we have our whole design laid out and in place, let's go ahead and place some pins so that our pieces don't wiggle around while we're stitching. For each leaf, we're just going to place one pin facing down. And we are going to be removing some of these as we work. This is just to hold it in place for right now. And then I'm going to put one right through the cap, coming through the bottom, because we're going to need to remove these caps when we stitch along the bottom of the acorn. But just for now to hold it in place. We're all set. The technique we'll be using is called appliqué. Appliqué is just a fancy word for sewing pieces of fabric onto a larger piece of fabric to make a picture or a design. We'll start by sewing around the leaves with a running stitch. You can decide what color floss you want to use for each part of the design. You can choose a color that matches the felt color, go a little bit lighter or darker if you want your stitching to show up, or use a contrasting color if you really want your stitching to pop. Now that we have our design all pinned down, it's time to sew it on. So I've prepared my chenille needle with 3 strands of floss, and I tied a knot at the end. And I chose to just do brown for the whole thing. So whatever you choose to do is fine. So we're going to start, I'm going to put my thimble on too. We're going to start right here at the base of the leaf, and we're going to come up through both pieces of felt, the bookmark and the leaf, just like when we practiced our running stitch. So the knot has touched on the back. And so now I'm going to go down about 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to be thinking about those 4 S's as I'm stitching along. And as you'll notice, I'm just a little bit inside this leaf because the idea is we want these stitches to hold the leaf down to the bookmark. So I don't want to be too far inside the leaf that I've got some flapping going on right here. I want it pretty close to the edge so that it's nice and secure but not too far away that it's kind of flopping around. We don't want that. As you're stitching along, you'll notice that we're coming up to a bend in the leaf here. And if you remember when we were practicing on our practice felt, when we got to a corner, we wanted to make sure that either a stitch was coming up out of the corner or going down into that bend. So I've gone down into the bend right here, and I'm going to come up on the other side so that I can start heading down this side of the leaf. So anytime you get to a place in the leaf where you're going to need to go around a corner, go ahead and go down or up in that corner and you'll be good to go. So you're going to work your way around the whole leaf. When you get about halfway, you're good to remove the pin because there's enough stitches in the leaf that are going to keep it from moving around and going anywhere. So you just need to keep that pin in until you feel pretty confident that your piece is going to stay in place while you stitch. Go ahead and work your way around this leaf. Tie off when you get to the back, or get back up to the base on the back, and then work your way around the next leaf until you get to the base. Okay, once you reach the end of your leaf, we'll go ahead and turn it over and tie off. Okay, now that we've got our leaves sewn down, we're going to move down to the acorns. So to sew the acorns down, we're going to have to remove the little caps and just pin the acorns in place, and we're going to do the running stitch around each acorn just like we did the leaves. So I'm going to take each little cap off to get them out of the way because I'm going to come back and do those in just a few minutes. So as I'm stitching these down, I'm only going to sew from right about here all the way around the lower part and end right here. And I'm not going to worry about sewing around this top part here because when I put the cap back on and I sew it, it's just going to be attached through sewing the cap on. So we don't need to do any extra stitching. Okay, once I get this little acorn sewn down, I'm going to go back and grab one of the caps and put it in place, and you'll notice that I did not cut we're not tying off here in the back because I'm just going to pick up right where I left off and work my way around that acorn cap before I tie off. So let's go ahead and do that. And now I'm just going to come up right through all these layers and start working my way around the cap. Okay, once you've worked your way around your acorn cap, we'll go ahead and flip our work over and you can tie this little acorn off. And now we're going to go ahead and do the same thing for this acorn. After you've stitched around the caps, we're going to make 3 little cross stitches on each cap. A cross stitch looks like a little X and is made by making diagonal stitches going one direction and then coming back the other way to cross them. To begin making our cross stitches, we're going to take our fabric pen and use it for the first time. And what I like to do is I like to make a little dot right in the middle where I want my first cross stitch to be. Then I'm going to center another little dot between the edge and the center dot and another little one on this side. And then I will go ahead and do the same thing for this lower cap. And that is just going to give me a good idea of where I want to place my cross stitches. So now I'll take my thread with 3 strands again, and it's got a knot tied in it, and I'm going to come up from the back, and that dot right there is going to be the center of my X. So I'm going to cross diagonally that little dot so it's right in the middle of my stitch. And then I'm going to come over and I'm going to do another one for this middle dot. And one more for this dot way over here on this side. So you can see I've made 3 little diagonal lines going that direction. Now I'm going to come back this direction and make them all X's. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over, tie off, and do the exact same thing on the other acorn top. Now that we've got our design pieces sewn to the bookmark with the running stitch, we're going to add the backstitch detailing. Okay, for our next step, we're going to go ahead and draw our leaf veins and the twigs for the acorns onto our bookmark with our fabric pen. So go ahead and grab your reference template one more time so that you can use it as a guide to draw your twigs on. So I'm going to start up here at the top, and I'm just going to I'm just freehanding this, and I'm just following the design that's on here. And it does not have to be exact because you can do your own thing. So I'm just following this as a basic guide, but if you have a different way that you would like to draw yours, you can feel free to do that. Okay, I've got my leaf veins drawn on, and now I'm going to go ahead and I want to draw these little twigs that are coming from the leaves to my acorns. Okay, and that will just give us a nice little line to stitch on. So the next thing we'll do is we're going to take our prepared thread. Now again, I'm just using plain brown for the whole thing. And so if you would like to change colors, you are free to do so. And we're going to start with our back stitching. So we've practiced the back stitching, so you should be good to go. And I can set this aside for now, and I'm going to start right up here at the tip of this little leaf vein, or the little stem, starting 1/4 of an inch down from the line that I drew, pulling until my knot stops on the back, and then going back up to the end of my line. And if you'll remember, when we were practicing, you come down about 1/4 of an inch below your previous stitch, and then this little guy is going to share the same hole. So we're going to go ahead and stitch this stem for a few stitches. Then when we get to where one of the veins takes off from the stem, all we're going to do is we're going to take a little detour in that direction. So I'm going to stitch this little leaf vein next by just heading off this direction. Okay, now I want to show you a fun little trick to get from here back to here without having to trail my floss all the way across the back there. So what we're going to do is I'm going to turn my piece over on the back, and I'm going to thread my needle under some of these stitches that I've made, just so we don't have a loose piece of floss on the back of our piece of work. And then once I've gotten back to where I need to start heading up this little vein again, I can poke it back up from the back, right where I left off. Okay, so now what I want you to do is to go ahead and finish this leaf the same way, working your way down each vein and then backtracking to the main vein. When you get here to the tip, you can go ahead and tie off and start again on this leaf, and then we'll do the twigs together. All right, so I've got my next leaf done. I'm going to go ahead and tie off. Okay, to start the twigs, we're going to go ahead and start right here where we drew our line. And just working the same back stitch all the way down this twig. All right, when you get your twigs done, you can go ahead and turn it over and tie off your work. Take a minute to admire your work. The last step is to sew a backing onto our finished piece. This is what the back of my bookmark looks like. So yours probably looks similar. Now we're going to hide the back by pinning the second bookmark to the back of our work. So what you're going to do is you're going to line up both pieces like this, and we're going to go ahead and place a few pins so that they don't wiggle around while we're trying to stitch them together. So I'm going to place a pin on each end. And then I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of pins on each side, and that way it should keep it nice and secure while I'm sewing. Okay, so I'm going to show you a fun trick to hide the knot between the layers so that our knot doesn't show on the back of our bookmark. I'm going to come up in between both layers for my first stitch, and then I'm going to make sure that my knot is tucked away there right between the two of them, so that when we're finished with our bookmark, our knots won't show. So we're going to go ahead and start doing our running stitch along the top of our bookmark. And we're just making sure as we go that we've got the edges of the top bookmark and the back one nice and lined up so that we have a nice flat edge. And then, as always, when we get to our pins, when we're working, we can just take them out because they've done their job. When you're getting down to the place where you need to trade your floss for a new piece because it's getting too short, let me show you how you can hide that knot in between the layers just like we did when we got started. So I'm going to come up from the back and I'm going to poke my needle through one layer of the bookmark, and then you can see right here in the between the layers I've got my last little stitch, and I'm going to thread my needle under that stitch in between the layers and come into that loop, give it a little tug, and I'm going to do the same thing. And then I'm going to go ahead and thread my needle under these stitches that are in between the two layers to kind of secure that little tail down. And that way we've got no stitches on, or no knots on the front and on the back. So it's a good way to hide. So now we're going to go ahead and start our new piece of floss. I'm just going to do the same thing by hiding the knot in between the layers. So what I want you to do now is go ahead and you're going to stitch around the whole bookmark with your running stitch, hiding your knots in between the layers as you need to trade floss. And let's go ahead and finish this up. Okay, I'm back here to the end, so I'm just going to go ahead and hide my knot right in here between the layers, just like we did before. And here is our finished bookmark. You've just added 4 more skills to your sewing toolbox: learning how to use a pattern, the applique technique, the backstitch, and the cross stitch. Now that you've finished your first project, I hope you know what it feels like to sew a little piece of yourself into your work.